evening and welcome to the fourth in our series of WES Talks, organised by the New Room, Bristol, and in partnership with the Methodist Church Learning Network Southwest. The New Room is the oldest Methodist building in the world, situated in Bristol city centre, and it's often referred to as a light in the city. It was used by John Wesley as a base for his work, and in 2017 we opened a new visitor centre complete with library and archives, newly refurbished museum, cafe and shop. And we opened today, so do come back and visit us. It's great to be reopened again after this past year. My name's Kate Rogers and I work as Collections Manager and Community Engagement Officer for the New Room. And I'll be the host this evening. And behind the scenes, we have Mandy Briggs, who is looking after our tech for us. So thank you very much, Mandy. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. You'll be able to hear our panelists, but your own video and audio will be switched off. If you have a particular question after hearing from our speakers and listening to the questions in our panel, then please save them for the question time at the end, when we'll be inviting people to put their questions into the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. The aim of the WES Talks series is to explore life and faith in today's world, and often links historic characters who try to make a difference and contemporary issues. So this evening we are exploring the world of craftivism and asking the question, can you gain a political voice through craft? Our three speakers and panelists this evening, I'll introduce them by reading just a short bio, and then I'll bring them in to give presentations about their work. So our main speaker this evening is Katie Stiles. Katie is a full-time carer and campaigner who founded the award-winning We Care campaign for unpaid carers in 2018. At that time, Katie felt that unpaid carers' voices were going unheard by decision makers. Katie is a huge fan of Sarah Corbett and the Craftivism collective. And Katie and the We Care campaign have successfully used craftivism, craft and activism to highlight carers' issues in parliaments across the UK. So I'm now going to invite Katie, our main speaker for this evening, to tell us more about her story and her work. Over to you, Katie.
Lovely. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. So fingers crossed. Okay, and hopefully you can see that. And I'll make a start. So firstly, thank you for having me and inviting me to talk on how you can gain a political voice through craft. I wish I was with you in person, but it's equally nice to be with you all virtually, I have to say. In my talk, I'm going to quickly go through who I am and what I do, what craftivism is and how we've used craftivism in our campaign. I'll finish off with a few resources if you're keen to learn more. So I'm Katie Stiles. I'm a full-time unpaid carer and campaigner. I live in Canterbury in Kent with my husband, Mark. Mark has a rare form of motor neuron disease, and I also care for my mum, who's increasingly frail. She lives in her own home about 30 miles away from me, and we've been shielding here at home, so it's not been particularly easy organising both ourselves and mum from a distance. I'm a sort of accidental campaigner and I've always enjoyed making things. So whether that's been through sewing, embroidery or making quilts. I founded We Care, the award-winning grassroots volunteer-led campaign, to achieve better recognition and appreciation for unpaid carers in the UK by putting those with lived experience at the heart of all of our work. We are determined that unpaid carers' voices are heard and our contribution to society valued. I did this because I felt at the time, and still do, that unpaid carers' voices were going totally unheard. Carers' issues are rarely voiced. We are unseen, unheard, yet 3 out of 5 of us will be a carer to somebody else in our lifetimes. 6,000 people become a carer every day, and on average it takes 2 years for a carer to recognise themselves in that role. To be clear, when I use the term carer, I mean unpaid family carers, not paid care workers. Not recognising our role means that we go without vital support, don't claim benefits we're entitled to, and aren't signposted to information that would help us. I founded We Care after I'd run a petition on the government's website, calling for a national carers strategy. A national strategy that would help identify and support carers more systematically. We were promised a strategy to support carers like myself back in 2016, and we're still waiting 5 years later. During the pandemic, we had no register of unpaid carers, for example, so no way of pulling out that vital information when it was needed most. It became clear whilst running the petition that carers wanted to campaign. I had been told that they would be too tired, too isolated, and too disenfranchised to campaign. Turns out they just need support and help to do so. So what exactly is craftivism? It's craft and activism together. It's a term that was coined by Betsy Greer in 2003. It's about using craft to create a positive change to an injustice. It's a form of gentle protest. It's slow, full of purpose, and supports the mental health of the campaigner, which is also equally important moving forwards in these difficult times. Often when you think of a protest, you'll be thinking of placards being waved, people marching, sitting, protest songs. There's a place for all these tactics. Craftivism is another tactic to use. There's a long history of craftivism, from the suffragettes who used craft to highlight their call for the women's vote, and trade unions who carry elaborate banners. There's lots of examples of craftivism being used right now. Indeed, there is a COVID quilt being created right now, following on from the AIDS quilts created in the 90s. Craftivism has been used to fight for a living wage for workers at Marks and Spencer's by engaging with the M&S board. There are campaigns to engage people to think about where their clothes are made and by whom for Fashion Week. Craftivism campaigns raise awareness of the importance of having cervical smear tests, right through to the hombres who knit in Chile, who whilst knitting on the streets of Santiago, promotes a more tolerant and less macho society. Craftivism has always been part of We Care's toolbox of tactics. Why is that? When we set up We Care on a virtual call before the world even had Zoom, and we didn't know the phrase, "You're on mute," we were clear about our vision of campaigning. It was important to us that we would be caring in our approach. I knew I wanted to use craftivism after I was lucky enough to meet Sarah Corbett of the Craftivist Collective at an awards ceremony for campaigners the year before. As a campaign of carers, it was important to use tactics that were more caring, that went with our personalities, and were available to do at a time that suited unpaid carers themselves. Our carers' issues are incredibly important, but few of us would be able to join a protest. We couldn't leave our cared for, so we had to think about how we could get our message across. It's perfect for those of us who are quieter, those of us who are more introverted and still feel strongly about an issue. Just because we aren't shouting loudly doesn't mean this tactic for raising a political voice is any the less powerful. It's another way of engaging, of getting a point across, of building relationships to make a change. We started our campaign with the Craftivist activity. We held a launch party, a physical event, and invited carers, their cared for, and our MP. We created felt squares we drew on and embroidered what caring meant to each of us. During the 2 hours of the event, we got carers to open up about their caring roles. The process and rhythmic movement of sewing gave the attendees a sense of calm. All chatted to their MP, where they had never spoken to an MP before. They had found a different type of political voice. We had set the scene for success. We chose an accessible venue. We made sure that the event engaged with all people's senses. So we brightened up the event space. We added tablecloths, bunting, flowers, played music. There were homemade cakes and endless cups of tea in abundance. It all added to a sense of community and stitching something special together. In the run-up to the general election in December 2019, we had run a highly successful sticking plaster campaign. Why sticking plaster? Because as unpaid carers, we feel like a sticking plaster, holding the health and social care systems together. We are overstretched and undervalued. The campaign brought us to the attention of national organisations like Oxfam, and we were awarded our first grant. And we wanted to build on this theme and the momentum that we had created. We had planned another Craftivist event for carers in March 2020. Well, you know what happened next. The pandemic hit. That event was going to be filmed for a BBC programme. It had involved an awful lot of pre-planning. So I have to say, at that point, I was pretty despondent. And I wondered how We Care could support carers at this crucial time. We took the work that went into organising that event and turned it into a standalone Craftivism kit to create your own sticking plaster to send to your political decision maker. It was a kit of everything you needed to create your own fabric plaster. All you would need was 30 minutes, a piece of writing paper, an envelope and a stamp, in addition, to present that sticking plaster to your own MP. We had some suggestions for wording of the letter to the MPs. We had ideas of the thoughts to think about and mull over as you stitched. It was a strategic symbol of how we felt as carers, but more than that, we added solutions to the issues we raised. We created over 100 kits, which we posted out during lockdown. This wasn't easy in itself, as I was shielding with my husband at that time, but we pulled it off through using things like the Royal Mail app to print out the stamps and postage labels we needed. We sent the kits out to coincide with Carers' Rights Day, which is at the end of November each year. It wouldn't have felt right to send these out earlier on in the pandemic, as at the start of lockdown, carers were busy just trying to survive and firefighting their problems. We sent out the kits to all 4 corners of the UK, from the Isle of Skye down to Cornwall, across to Anglesey and over to Belfast and back to Broadstairs, even some to Bristol. We encouraged carers and supporters to send us photos of the finished articles and tag us in on social media. We used a hashtag and monitored our feeds. We started to receive videos of carers and supporters unboxing their kits, sewing their plasters, letters being written, solutions being presented and made. We had requests from carers who didn't know who their MP was and could we help find their address to send them to. We had photos of plasters where carers had taken it a step further and felted them or added embroidered words. We had photos of their creations being posted from special post boxes. And the impact? Carers felt part of a community where they were so very isolated before. Some received replies from their MPs, thanking them for their special plasters and pledging to support carers in their constituencies and in Parliament. We watched committees in parliaments across the UK wearing the badges we had included in the kits. They were worn in chambers in debates. We had an increase in questions on carers allowance the carers strategy and carers issues in general in the December after the plasters were sent. A voice for those who had none or little voice before. And whilst we know that's the start of the conversation between carers and their political representatives, we know that it won't be the last. Finally, I thought I would just pull together a list of slides for you where you wanted to know more about Craftivism. Firstly, there's the Craftivism Making a Difference BBC4 programme that I mentioned that's on BBC iPlayer at the moment. It's an hour long with lots of craftivists involved. We're in there and you might see me and where I live, and I'll let you into a secret. I actually had to self-film all of my pieces on my mobile phone, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sarah Corbett has a TED Talk which has over 1 million views on YouTube called Activism Needs Introverts, which I can recommend. And Sarah also runs the Craftivist Collective and has written the book How to Be a Craftivist. It contains everything you need to start your journey in craftivism. She's on social media and you can see that below, and she's crowdfunding for a second book on Unbound at the moment, so you can check that out. I've included some Twitter accounts there for Craftivists you might like to follow. Craftivist Collective, Deadly Knit Shades, and Craftivista, who's Betsy Greer. And then finally, if you're at all interested in the issues of carers, like myself or are a carer, you can join and follow We Care in the following ways. We'd love to know what you get inspired to do for your craftivism and how you use it. Tag us in, we're very social, and stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was fascinating to hear more about your story and your campaign, especially when you created that kit and were able to use it so effectively, even though we had the pandemic going on. And I'm really pleased you got such a great response from MPs wearing their badges and things. So thank you so much for sharing with us. That is prompting a lot of kind of discussion questions in my mind and probably in the mind of our audience as well. We are going to come back to the discussion, but first I'm going to introduce our other panelists. First we have Rachel Parkinson. Hello, Rachel. I'm just going to share a little bit of a bio for you, and then I will hand over to you to give an introduction to the work that you've been involved in. So Rachel Parkinson is a presbyter in the Methodist Church. She's currently serving as chair of Wolverhampton and Shrewsbury District. She has a passion for building community through collaborative art. As a glass user, Rachel is delighted that the district includes the historic centre of the glass industry, and she's currently on her third collaboration linking the Methodist Church with the International Festival of Glass. So Rachel, can you tell us a little bit more about your work, please?
Thank you very much, Kate. Yes, I'd love to. And thank you so much to Katie for that. That was a really wonderful presentation. And from Katie, I think you've got a very sort of classic craftivism, and on that really important issue of unpaid carers, a real sort of focus. Whereas I'm going to present a far more scattergun approach, really, of all sorts of different things. And I'm going to share my screen as well, because this topic really lends itself to pictures as well as words. So I'm just going to run through a few things that I've done. I just love making things, and in ministry, creating with people has always been really important. So this was within a few months of my moving to Wolverhampton. There was a campaign, an international campaign in the end, that was timed with the inauguration of Donald Trump as US president, inviting people to make the statement, "Bridges, not walls." And so this is actually on the probationers retreat for our district and one or two other districts. And one of the things they did in their evening was to make these banners, which is made from bird netting that goes over scaffold, and just some ripstop fabric. And then when we got back, we worked with Walsall City of Sanctuary Group and hung "Bridges Not Walls" and "Love Conquers Hate" over some random canal bridges whilst blowing vuvuzelas and generally having a wonderful time. I have taken part in some classic Craftivism campaigns that other people have organised. So Deacon Tracy Hume, a little while ago, maybe about 3 years, had the wonderful Be an Angel campaign and invited people to send angels to their MP to talk. That was mainly around the failings in the universal credit system and the sanction system and so on. And more recently, the Joint Public Issues team has campaigned to reset the debt, talking about the numbers of families where they were already extremely vulnerable before the pandemic, but now they've got the extra load of COVID debt as well. So I made that for my MP and presented it to him just in time that he could hang it on his Christmas tree if he wanted to as well. But some other things I've done are maybe slightly less classically craftivist, but I would say that they're still finding, as it were, a political voice in terms of talking about the type of community that I want to be part of. So the biggest project we've ever done was in Leicester, where we linked together with 15 different community groups. The church has organised it, but reached out to as many community groups as we could to make these absolutely giant puppets. And so everybody from sort of scout groups to groups for people with learning disability to preschools, as many groups as we could think of, to really give the message that everyone is creative. Everyone has creativity to bring to the table, and together we can make amazing things. So we made these huge puppets, which we could then use at storytelling in the city centre at Christmas and at Easter. That's the disciples trying to procure the donkey for Palm Sunday, which we did in the city centre. Kate mentioned in my introduction that I'm extremely lucky to be in Wolverhampton and to be near the heart of glass making as an industry. You'll hear from Mickey soon, and she takes all the credit for introducing me to glass as a wonderful art form. And I've worked with a local church who are in that area to be part of the international festival. So 2 years ago, the theme for the festival was placemaking. And so we chose this title, Home is Where the Heart Is, ? Because we wanted to raise the issue, particularly around asylum seekers and refugees, where often where they've landed up, their home is sometimes in a different place from their heart. They're sort of torn. And so we tackled this in different ways. Reached out to the glass fusing community. So this is Eleanor, who lives in London. She, for instance, made that lovely glass heart on the theme All at Sea. I found this most moving because she did a sort of sea theme and there were tiny red dots. And she said to her, those represented people wearing life jackets floating around on the sea. Just amazing and very moving to me. But also I made a whole load of plain glass hearts and took them, in this case, to an event that was being held through Wolverhampton City of Sanctuary, and then encouraged people to use glass pens to express themselves on these tiny little canvases. So there, Ayad was the first person I asked, and he knew exactly what he was going to do. He took out his mobile phone and found that picture of the spiral minaret of the great mosque in the city of Samarra, which is his home. And he immediately went and painted that. And then during the festival itself, an international festival, we invited the community creative songwriting group Sounds of Sanctuary, which includes many refugees from around the world, though particularly from Syria, and they came and performed in the heart of the festival. So that all worked together in, I think, a really wonderful way. During the pandemic, again, like Katie, had to improvise and come closer to home. So in the autumn, some glass pens and some autumn leaves I decorated just with hope, because it was at a time when, you know, the days were getting shorter, and I just left these around on my street, sort of pinned down under stones, and ended up having some amazing conversations with neighbours, because I did it under anonymity, and that led to quite a lot of discussion around why these leaves had popped up. And then following on from that, before Christmas, I invited some of my neighbours to give hospitality to a little clay figure that I made, and 24 households responded, and they decorated their little figures. My favourite one is from the life of Brian. One that said, "I'm Brian, I'm not the Messiah, I'm a very naughty boy." But we also had Leicester City football players, we had Santa Claus, all sorts of different ones. But again, this was a theme around hospitality, around neighbourhood. And then just over Christmas, we put a gazebo up on our drive, and the neighbours brought home their little people around a nativity set I'd made. And we also, some neighbours made landmarks from Wolverhampton out of just scrap materials. So this became a nativity set in the heart of the city centre, and we did a collection for the local food bank and helped to raise its profile as well. And then the final thing, thinking about glass, is that I've wanted to help people really think about what the effects of the pandemic have been upon them and upon their communities, our society and the world. And I invited people to think of 12 words which they associated with the experience of the pandemic. Did this on social media, lots of people contributed. And then these seem to fall quite naturally into different groups. So, for instance, there is one around inequality, crowding, injustice, poverty, debt, food banks, insomnia, domestic violence, the sort of real inequality. Other ones around death and grief. But then also words which people had found, things, discoveries they'd made during the pandemic. So garden, joy, quiet, sunlight. And for me, these seem to fall into like stations of the cross and stations of resurrection. So I was able to gather these and put them in a glass sort of background, and then put them outside our house again on display, and invite people to think about their own sets of words and what they would have contributed as well. So that's just a quick run through on, as I say, a very scattergun approach of using all sorts of different ways of expression. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. That was wonderful to hear of all the different types of projects you were involved in. And thank you for putting together that visual presentation. As you said earlier, it's no match when you need to describe something. Having a picture really helps to see different project work that's come about. So thank you. More food for thought on our discussion. We're now going to move to our third and final panelist, who's Michaela Youngson. And I'll just read a little bio on Mickey before I hand over to her to share some of the things that she's been involved in. So Mickey is a Methodist presbyter serving as chair in the London district of the Methodist Church. Mickey is the author of Making the Colours Sing in 2005, and The Weaver, The Word and Wisdom, Worshipping the Triune God, 2007. Mickey can often be heard on BBC Radio 2 when she offers a pause for thought on the early breakfast show, or on BBC Radio 4 leading the daily service. In her spare time, she works with glass, making jewellery and art pieces. I'd like to hand over to Mickey to talk about her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. It's lovely to be here, everybody. And I will in a few moments share some pictures of my own, but just to say a little bit, like Rachel, I don't consider myself a classic craftivist. In fact, I don't think I've ever applied the term craftivist myself, but I was really impressed with Kate and the very focused and complete package that was offered through that sticking plaster campaign. It was a whole thing of itself and had massive impact, and that's really important. And the sort of things Rachel is involved with are so community focused that they have an impact as well. And I look on in awe and wonder at these things. But the very act of being a female glass artist in Britain, particularly in England, is in itself a political statement. The guilds, the glass guilds, the Guild of Glass Painters, the historical guild through which stained glass was done in England. It was a bit different in Scotland, but in England particularly, the only way you could do that job was to be part of the guilds, and women, funnily enough, were not allowed in. So there is definitely something about being a glass artist and a woman that is political. But nowadays, many women are involved in glass fusing and glass art, but often will call themselves craft, you know, that they're doing craft rather than art. And it's very interesting how the men got to be the artists and the women got to do the crafts. And there's some interesting questions there about where the line is between craft and art. And art instantly can put barriers. People perceive barriers when they hear the word art. They think you have to understand complex ideas or have a particular skill set that only very special people have. Well, of course, there are some very special artists around, but actually craftivism allows, it's accessible, it allows a way in to activities. Some could well and truly be classed as art. Those puppets in Leicester, how could they not be art? They're amazing, and so many other things as well. But what I really want to think about is how, because I can't class myself a craftivist, I just about managed to call myself a glass artist. It takes a kind of leap of the imagination. It's a bit like when you have a book published and finally think, oh, does that mean I'm an author? It's not a word that sits comfortably. The thing about being an artist is that art often has a message. In the way that craftivism does. And I've really enjoyed over the last 2 or 3 years starting to do glass art pieces that have a message. I made some panels following the massacre in Orlando in the gay nightclub, and that I haven't brought pictures of those to that today, but that was I linked it with my understanding of faith, the salvation story that I'm caught up in as a Christian. And it's called Orlando Good Friday, and it's an image to do with loss and blood and grief, and it's linking the horror of Good Friday with Christ on the cross with the death of those many people in that nightclub. So that's one example of a way in which art passes on a message. I'm going to share screen because that's the fashionable thing to do. And I'm going to slideshow. Here we go. I'm going to share with you an installation that I put together. I was commissioned by the Joint Public Issues team of the Methodist Church, ready for their conference, which took place about a week before lockdown last year in the end. And it was a conference around economics, faith and the environment. And this image shows the 6 pieces that made up that installation. And I'll take you through what each one represents. But it was an incredible honour to be able to do that work. And at the moment, those glass pieces sit in my lounge in a display cabinet until the Methodist Church central offices open up again, and then they'll be on display there, and hopefully people will see the message behind them. But these are 6 acts of uncreation, thinking of the 6 days of creation in the story of Genesis. And here are 6 ways in which human beings are uncreating. So this one is commodification. So you can see in the middle there's a barcode, and if you scan it, it doesn't actually take you to a product in Tesco's. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm really not that good. But it is commodification. Everything has a price, but how much does it have a value? Everything is labelled and numbered, and fits into a world where so much is based on GDP, gross domestic product. And we've, since this was made in the pandemic, how fragile our economic situation is around the world. And we know that for the poorest and the most vulnerable in the world, the way that we trade has a terrible impact. This is desertification or desertification. I can never pronounce it. I'm talking about trifle. It's about the water disappearing and the land cracking where there used to be rivers, and the desert is spreading. So that's that one. And deforestation. So we have green trees, lush and alive, next to lines and lines of dead, bleached trees that have been felled and are bleaching in the sun. And the way in which deforestation is another act of uncreation. And dying coral, we know about the coral reefs, and when coral dies, it loses its colour, it goes pale. So you can just see the edges of this piece, the edge of the coral is starting to change colour, but there's still hope because there is still some life within it. And there's the possibility in all these acts of uncreation that if the world acts quickly enough and together, we can make a difference. And then we have global warming. I think this is probably my favourite of these 6 discs, although every time I look at them, I get a different favourite because it's such a strong, powerful image, and it also looks a bit like a Japanese flag. But it's that, yeah, it's global warming. It's the raising temperatures of the planet and general climate change. And then the melting ice caps, which is probably my other favourite. And we know the impact that is going to have. And as we look towards the GOP conference in November in Glasgow, and the world leaders coming together to look at how we look at climate change and all that goes with it. This is another image that holds before us the reality of the situation that we face. So I've just brought, they're the only images I've brought today, and I'm going to stop sharing now. Just say, I think art has a power to give a message, and these aren't something you can stick in an envelope and send to your MP because the post isn't that good with fragile things, but the images can be used, and we've done that before. The panel I spoke about with Orlando Good Friday, and another one, Lampedusa Pieta, and a third one, which is Aleppo, the Harrowing of Hell. We turned into postcards and used them within the district that I send in to enable messages to be sent beyond just those who could see the actual glass pieces themselves. So that's a way into activism. What I really hope is that sometime in the next couple of years we can have an exhibition by glass artists and other artists, which is a challenge and about getting messages across to those in power about how we want the world to be the place that we long for it to be. So I hope that's enough. And as I say, I'm not really a craftivist, but I do love playing with glass. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mickey. It is wonderful that we've got 3 different speakers who bring something different to the table. We've got artists, those heavily involved in community projects, and also those who've run an effective campaign from start to finish on a project they're passionate about with Katie. So yeah, we'll make for an interesting discussion now. So I've got just a first question, which I'd like to throw out to Katie initially, just to get her thoughts on. So you have been at the forefront of this the campaign with the sticking plaster. I just wondered what your top tips for running an effective campaign were. Any lessons that you've learned along the way? What would you share with another person thinking about doing a similar type of work?
I think it's important to have fun with your craftivism. The campaign might be really, I mean, they're all really, really important and really serious, but actually to have a bit of fun makes all the difference. So that would be one of my top tips. I would also say that it's really important not just to create the piece, but to make sure that if you're leaving a piece somewhere, like Rachel was doing, I mean, there was the part about, you know, adding a note to say, you know, why that was important to you. And Rachel did that with her conversations. But also linking it to a website or petition so that you can engage people then to take an action. So I think those bits together, so definitely to have some fun, but to remember that your piece is part of your campaign, so is linked to an action. And yeah, it's got to be strategic so that's the important part, really.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, those are really good tips, the call to action especially. And similar question to Rachel and then to Mickey, about things you've seen, projects you've been involved in. What would you say to someone who's interested in doing something similar within the community, Rachel?
I think Katie's absolutely right. Humour is just wonderful, isn't it? You know, and it makes people want to participate, and it also adds so much interest. You want to engage, and that's what we want to aim for, is engagement, really. I think as well, in many of the things that I've done, it's trying to find a theme. So the sticking plaster theme was such a very powerful one, but also find one which then people can is accessible, so people can engage with. And I like campaigns where people can bring their own skills to make it. So another one I didn't show was that during the pandemic as well, outside we've had a very large frame, and it's been a thanking key workers. And so the only specification was that it was to make a heart. And so neighbours used a whole range of different things. So there's a guy down the road who does wood carving, and he carved a wooden heart, which was just absolutely amazing, and put it on the frame. Other people did mosaics and felts and things, but having that main theme and then allowing people to bring their own creativity to it, I think is a good tip.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mickey, to that question?
I think the focus is a really important thing. I think being really clear, and I think if it's a community-based activity or nationwide, like some of the things Methodist women in Britain, who are a natural source of craftivists, and I've spotted with a few members of them on the taking part today in the attendees, that you make it something that's accessible and easy to join in with. So, you know, it might be writing on a paper plate to send a particular message. I think one of the things we do have to watch, and we're learning as we go along with this, is about thinking about the impact on the environment of the activities we do as well. That's something to bear in mind. So something sustainable, something preferably as little plastic as possible involved, but just holding a very focused idea and sharing that with people in a way that's very accessible for all ages, all skill sets. I think that really helps.
Thanks, Mickey. That leads on nicely to the another question which I have here about. So craftivism's become really popular and it's attracted lots of media attention in recent years. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the future of craftivism. Where would you like to see it make an impact next? Yes, if you have something, jump in, or I'll select someone to respond to that first.
I think being aware of what other campaigns are around is quite important, because actually, I mean, we know that MPs are now a lot less interested in the mass online signature campaigns, petitions and so on. They're still interested in people writing very personally and with why it impacts on them. And I think if we're aware of what other campaigns, so we're not repeating what others have done, that we join in with those who've got similar aims. I think the impact of the campaigns will reduce over time if MPs' inboxes or post boxes are just full of little bits of what they may consider tat. So it needs to be, it needs to be something that's, little, very good and very infrequently, I think, has the biggest impact if it's a constant swamping. But yeah, which isn't that I don't think people should keep doing it. I just think be very strategic about it.
I think the thing that perhaps you're missing there also is that MPs are really competitive and they quite like to have things to show that, this is what one of their constituents has sent them and spent time making. So, I mean, that's also a really important point, that they like to show off actually what they've had and what's been sent to them. So, yeah, that's important, isn't it?
And I think Mickey's already mentioned about the sort of tension between craftivism always uses materials, and yet so that whole thing around being able to do craftivism around the environment, but in a sense by helping people to understand how they can reuse and so on and so forth, is in itself sort of part of reinforcing the campaign as well. I certainly know that I ran Messy Church for a number of years, and now when I look back right at the beginning, I thought we got through an awful lot of sort of plastic type based material, and so generally when we're making things within the church anyway, I think being really inventive and creative, and often I think you have to use more ingenuity and creativity when you're working within boundaries, as I'm sure, like Katie, you've got to do something which you can send out in packs and so on and so forth. But I think that challenge can often then bring something to the project in itself. So yeah, I think environment is a good one for craftivism.
Thanks. So people are busy typing their questions into the Q&A, which I will get to in just a few moments. So if you have a question, please do type it into that box now. Final question from me is, so someone might be listening to this and they are thinking, I really love the concept behind all of this. I'd love to get involved, but I can't sew and I don't feel I'm very creative, but I'd like to help. How would you respond to that? Are there elements of a Craftivist campaign that you could suggest they take part in? How would you respond to someone saying that?
So actually another Craftivism activity that I've done, because I also campaign with the Motor Neuron Disease Association because of the link with my husband. And we had a campaign called MND Costs, which explained how much the extra cost of actually having a disability was, which was colossal. And we made jars of chili jam. Now that might sound a bit odd, but it was it was a play on the word, chili, but also, so that was something that was sustainable and could be used and could be eaten, and was in a glass jar, and went to MPs. But it was around, the fact that you couldn't afford the cost of your heating and things like that. But you could invite somebody then to share a sandwich with you and then explain with the chili jam, what it was that you were doing. So I think, there is always something that you can do, whether you're sort of think you're crafty or not. You just have to spin it, really.
Thank you. Anything to add from Rachel or Mickey on that question?
I'd agree. Everybody has creativity within them. It's just being able to recognise what it is, I think. And then the other thing is finding collaborators. And yeah.
I was going to say it might be that you stick the stamps on for other people who've done the creative bit, or address the envelopes, or are the one that takes them to the post office. So although I agree with Rachel, everybody has creativity within them. I never thought I was creative, but it turns out I possibly am. So you never know till you have a go.
Thank you. That's some encouragement for people listening. Thanks, everybody. So I'm now going to move to the questions that we've received from our audience. So David Palmer asks, we have seen humour used, but what about shocking? He then goes on to add, I think this is linked, or does that have a negative response?
I'm immediately thinking of the, but I can't remember, perhaps somebody else in the room. What's the embroidery group that embroiders swear words on their Craftivism? Or am I was just thinking that's immediately, but that's a combination of shock and fun. But yeah, I don't know.
I think something about telling the truth, something about truth, and within the humour or separately from a humorous campaign, the truth can be quite shocking. We don't need to be deliberately offensive in order to get a response, but sometimes actually basing what we do on really good information. So the sort of stuff that JPIT put out about poverty in the UK and so on, getting the facts and figures and presenting them in an attractive way that has massive impact. So whether it's the showing of the cost of a meal, how cheaply a rich person can eat compared to a person in poverty, something like that. So it is shocking because it's reality, but it's not setting out to offend. I would say set out to offend, that's the way you're going to get the results. But I think probably in our context as a faith community, I'm not going to advocate offending people for the sake of it.
We have a question for Katie from Sarah. She asks, are you aware of any raising awareness of the plight of child carers of adults?
No. That would be great. I mean, when we did our sticking plaster thing, actually, during the general election, we did use some child sticking plasters, so My Little Pony ones and things like that, to recognise that there were young carers as well. So I mean, that's something that could spin out of this, definitely.
Absolutely, thank you. We've got a question from Alan Jenkins. He asks, how do those of us whose craft is by nature something rather solitary connect with others, more communal crafts and cross people? He also writes, I can't imagine taking my drawing board and quills to an outdoor political event. So maybe as Mickey, as the artist, how would you respond to Alan's kind of challenge?
I think it's really interesting. I noticed on one of Katie's slides, I think it said craftivists needs introverts. There's something there. I mean, it's really interesting for me because I'm, according to all the measures, an off the scale extrovert, but actually the time I spend working on my craft, on my art, is something I do very much on my own. But I do really love inviting other people to come in and have a go, which Rachel knows because that's how we started, really. And so maybe for Alan, it's about inviting someone to come and watch what he does and learn from him. And that way it kind of goes viral, because it didn't just stop with Rachel. There are a number of people now in the life of Methodism who are glass artists. So, but I think the connection word is the important one, how we connect. And if there's an issue we're really interested in, maybe it's the issue that connects us first, and then we work out what kind of craftivism that might get joined in with.
And I think, having seen some of Alan's really wonderful calligraphy, if you find a campaign that you also really believe in, and I can only imagine your MP, Alan, receiving an absolutely beautifully piece of calligraphy saying drop the debt, or sort of support carers or whatever, they wouldn't be able to toss that in the bin very easily, because it's beautiful work. So I think you'd have a great deal to offer.
So easy now, isn't it, to do things virtually? You don't need to be in a big group, but you can do that in 2s or 3s, and just do that.
Yeah, there's lots of positive affirmation for introverts and also those who've not started anything. So if you're keen, there's just the 4 of us here just encouraging you to get started somewhere. And as everyone here has found out, when they have started something, it's grown into something bigger and connected people together. So it would be really interesting to kind of get the audience back and see if this has started anything for anybody. I hope so. So we've got a question from Brenda, which is more of a practical question for Mickey. On your presentation with your pictures, she asks, what is the size of your 6 acts installation?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Hello. Yes, each of the circles is about 27 centimetres. So including the stand, they're probably about 40 centimetres across maximum. And the stands were made by my husband, whose hobby is fine furniture making, and they're in a very sustainable lacewood, which is from London plane trees that came down in the storm in '87. So just a little extra bit of the story there for those.
Thank you, thanks. We've had a question come in through from Joy, and she asks, how do you spread the word about your Craftivism project? If we go to Katie first for that one.
So we're on social media, so we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, so we have an email and mailing list, and we're sort of religious about sending out updates and putting out things all the time. But I think once you find your community, then it just widens and widens out. So yeah, that's important. And we use hashtags, obviously, so Craftivist, Craftivism, that sort of thing on posts, and that helps you be found by other craftivists or people that are interested in it. So that's the way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, thanks. Yeah, social media is such a blessing, and if you've got that audience, they can then do some publicity for you, can't they, because they share it and spread it far and wide. Any other tips from Rachel or Mickey on that front about spreading the word?
Quite a lot of my work, which has been done in community, is just literally sort of talking to people. In fact, it's been wonderful for making new relationships, because say making the giant puppets, and it was an excuse to talk to groups we maybe hadn't had conversations with before, and said, what can you make that could be something that went on a king or a shepherd or whatever. One of the most lovely things was that the brownies had just been taught finger knitting. And so we provided them, we asked for any sort of white or yellow or gold wool, and the brownies were given yards and yards and yards of this. They finger knitted it all, and they ended up being the curls on Gabriel's head. So we sort of put curls all over the angel's head, which was wonderful. But then social media as well. So with the International Glass Festival, then I'm fortunate both Mickey and I are in a number of Facebook groups which are international. So some of the fused glass which was sent into the festival had come from quite a lot had come from America as well. And then Twitter and hashtags. Yes, you're right, Katie, finding the right hashtags on Twitter or Instagram. There is an art to it, and experience just sort of builds up.
Thank you, thanks. And anything from you, Mickey?
I was Rachel got ahead of me there, because I was going to say it's not just the networks that we're already in to do with the campaigns. The craft itself has networks. So as Rachel was saying, we are very connected in with glass artists and crafters around the world, and likewise people who are part of a knitting group online and so on. And people really appreciate when we've posted things that have got a very Christian message or a political message or whatever, and we get an extraordinary amount of affirmation, not just for the glass skill, but actually about the message as well. And so there's an impact beyond where we wouldn't necessarily think is a natural sort of network that we're in. It's a network beyond where we might normally go. But social media is huge, and word of mouth as well, chatting with people.
Great. Well, thank you much. Thank you so much to all of you for contributing this evening and having this discussion. Sadly, that's all we've got time for on the discussion side of things. I'm sorry if we haven't had a chance to answer your question. We've had some really interesting questions through from lots of different angles, covered quite a lot. So on behalf of the New Room and the Learning Network, a huge thank you to Katie, Rachel and Mickey for coming along this evening and sharing their projects, their enthusiasm, and all that they've been involved with. It's been really fascinating to see your work and to hear about the future of craftivism. And I hope this has inspired people tonight to both get involved in the things that you're working on and support you, as well as maybe taking on their own passionate projects themselves. I will be sending out an email with all the attendees with links to the bios and the support of our speakers this evening if you'd like to read more. And if you would like to share this talk with others, it can be available on our online shop, and we'll have that ready for you to purchase. A couple of final notices before we finish for this evening. Our next WES talk will take place on Monday the 21st of June at 7:30, and this is a talk on the Toll Puddle Martyrs. How does their story still speak to us today? So we'll be inviting Simon Topping, a minister from South Gloucestershire, and Steph Jenner, former minister of Toll Puddle Methodist Church, and they'll be speaking to us about those 6 agricultural labourers from the village of Toll Puddle, and we'll be hearing more about their story. So do book your tickets online for that. We're finally going to bring up a poll question just for you to answer as our audience. So please have a look at that. And thank you so much for coming tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.